Okay, so hey guys, welcome to this session. It's been more than 15 years since Microsoft announced .NET Framework 1.0, and now we are facing something like a restart of .NET Framework, which is .NET Core, which is currently in version 2.0. Maybe the history will repeat because the .NET Framework experienced the broad adoption at its second version in 2005, and I think that it will be the same with .NET Core, since it's now 2.0, that this is the first version most of the developers will start playing with. The first version, 1.0 or 1.1, was something like beta maybe. So let's talk about how to build line of business applications in .NET Core. Because when .NET Framework emerged, there was one technology that was part of this package, and it was ASP.NET. And in ASP.NET, thousands of line of business applications were created, and they are still used in production, and a lot of companies rely on them. So, my name is Thomas Hersek, I'm from the Czech Republic, I'm Microsoft MVP, Microsoft RD, and I'm running a company called Giganti, which builds line of business applications since it was founded. So, let's start. If you want to build a line of business application, which should be run on the web, if you want to do it with .NET involved, you have several options today. The first and very archaic way of building line of business applications, how it was done 10 years ago maybe, is ASP.NET Web Forms. But this framework is not supported in .NET Core, and of course this technology is very old. It started 15 years ago, so there's a lot of things we solve differently today. You can use ASP.NET MVC. This is supported on .NET Core and gets a lot of new features like tag helpers and stuff like that. If you want to use just MVC, it can be used for simple line of business applications. But if you want anything complicated, you will need a lot of client-side interactivity. So you will need some JavaScript framework, JavaScript library to be involved in this process. Typical way of building such complicated web applications is to use some REST API or maybe GraphQL, but I think the REST API is still much more widely used. And some client-side library like Angular, React, Vue, or Knockout.js. Maybe a little poll. How many of you are using Angular? React? Also several people. Vue? No one? Okay, it's very new. There's a boom about Vue and Knockout.js. Okay, few people. Okay, so about half of you have some experience with these JavaScript frameworks, and maybe we have in our company we have used Angular and Knockout, and we have been successful in developing applications with these technologies. But still, there was something I wasn't satisfied at all, and it was code redundancy. If you are using .NET backend, .NET on the server, and for example Angular, but it applies to any other client-side library on the client, there is a lot of things you have to implement multiple times, once in C# and once in JavaScript. For example, if you are doing some order processing system, you will have an order class in C#, and you have to have something similar in JavaScript. Maybe you will use TypeScript classes or just interfaces, but still there's a duplication of the code. If you want to do validations and things like that, you will also do the validation on the client side, and of course you need to validate everything on the server because you cannot trust anything which you get from the client. So that's also duplication. And if you have spent last 10 years of your life by working with C#, and you don't have deep JavaScript skills, you can maybe declare a variable or write a function, but you don't know what is prototype, how inheritance works, how it differs in C# and JavaScript, and things like that. It will take you several months until you learn everything you need to work with Angular. Because it's not only about Angular, it's about dozens other small libraries. It's about maybe some Swagger or tooling for making the communication easier. Swagger is a tool which allows you to generate client proxy class to consume a REST API, and things like Node.js, NPM, and a lot of tools you will have to use. That's why I have started an open source framework called DotVVM about 3 years ago, and the idea behind this framework was to remove the code redundancy. When we was writing Angular controllers, it's a lot of code, and the code doesn't do anything interesting. It just grabs data from REST API, then it does some transformations on it and passes it to the user interface. Or the way back, you grab the data from the form, transform it into some object and send it to the server. So DotVVM is a framework which tries to make this process simpler. It doesn't mean that you won't need JavaScript, but you will need it only for the sophisticated things, not the trivial things like here are some data, I want to bind them to the user interface. So, DotVVM is an open source framework. It's developed on GitHub, and it brings the MVVM design pattern, and it tries to avoid writing boring JavaScript code. So you have two-way data binding, which is done because DotVVM uses Knockout.js on the background. The framework is component-based, so you can design and create reusable components. You can reuse the controls in many of your projects. DotVVM is strongly typed because it's based on C#, so you have the type checking, you have debugger, IntelliSense, you have everything you are used to from the backend development. And there is an integration for Visual Studio, and DotVVM supports also new .NET Core and also the old .NET framework. Not old, but classic maybe. It's just a .NET library which is compatible with ASP.NET, any ASP.NET application, so you can just install the NuGet package and add DotVVM into your project. This project is developed mostly in the Czech Republic. Most of the team is from the Czech Republic, and there are about more than 20 people who work in the team. So how does it work? I said that DotVVM is MVVM framework, and the idea is that you write view models in C#, and you have views are in HTML, and there are several extensions to the HTML. So you can see there is something like dot text box. Every DotVVM component starts with some prefix, so .text box. And there is the data binding, which is the stuff in the curly braces, which says that the name property from the view model will be bound to the text box. The data binding works in two ways. So when the user enters some value in the text box, this will appear in the C# object. On the last div, inside the last div, there's a button, so you can use the command binding to call a function in the view model. So that's how the MVVM works. The view is the HTML markup with controls and data binding, and the control with the data binding is translated to pure HTML with Knockout.js data bind syntax. So it generates some pieces of JavaScript code from the data bindings. View model is a C# class which can be serialized and sent to the client. It's sent to the client in JSON, and the purpose of the view model is to manage the state of the user interface. which means every control, everything the user can change in the page must be persisted in the view model. The view model represents the state of the page, and also the view model contains functions which can be invoked from the UI. So there is the submit function, which can be invoked by the user by clicking on a button. So there's two things we need from the view model. And the last part, the model, is just, we can think of a model as the top of the business layer. So it's the functions and classes, services, and objects that are provided by the business layer and which can be used in this MVVM world, in the presentation layer. So how to start with DotVVM? It's very easy. You just install extension in Visual Studio, and it will add a new project template, so you can create a DotVVM project, and it will also give you basic IntelliSense and syntax highlighting for DotVVM pages. So let's look how it works. So I have my Visual Studio 2017. Richard is slowing it down, but it's normal. And if you want to create a new project, the extension will add new project templates. So you can see we can choose .vvm web application on .NET Core, that's the first one. Then if you want to use the new ASP.NET Core libraries, but stay on old .NET Framework, it is also possible. So you can use ASP.NET Core plus .NET Framework. You may be interested in this combination. For example, if you want to use classic entity framework, or if you want to connect to some legacy business layer or something like that, which is not ported to .NET Core yet. And if you don't like .NET Core, if you don't trust it because it doesn't work, it always has some issues, you can use this version, which uses OWIN, which is part of the classic ASP.NET pipeline, and full .NET Framework. You can also use this to integrate with existing ASP.NET application. So I will create a new project in .NET Core, and the project is created, and it is just empty ASP.NET Core application with some pre-installed NuGet packages and several files. So let's look how it works. If I open the dependencies from NuGet, you can see that apart from the standard NuGet packages from ASP.NET Core, there is a package called .vvm.asp.NET Core, and that's it, nothing else. And we have a basic project structure. So in the startup file, we can see it's still classic ASP.NET Core. So in the configure services, we just register .vvm services by calling services at .vvm. This is an extension method. So this will register all the services required by .vvm. And in this configure function, we register .vvm middleware into the request pipeline. You can combine this with, for example, MVC, because you can say also app use MVC. I don't have the packages installed, but if I install it, I could use this combination, for example. Yeah, so it takes advantage of the ASP.NET Core extensibility. So I'm registering .vvm, and I'm referencing a class called .vvm startup, and this class contains the configuration of .vvm. As you can see, I have registered one route in my .vvm application. The route name is default. It's in the root URL of my application, and it points to a file called views/default.html. .vvm uses .html file extension. And in these folders, I have default.html and the default view model. Every view needs to have some view model. And this is the view, and the view model is just a C# class. So let's do some quick demo. First, I can start with the view model. So for example, I may create a simple calculator. So I can declare two integer properties, number 1 and number 2. Then I can declare a result, and I can create a function which is called calculate, and result equals number 1 plus number 2. Very simple. I have just two numbers, and if somebody clicks on some button, I will call the calculate and compute the result. Yeah, so it's very simple. It's a view model, and here in the view I can define several text boxes. So you can see there's an IntelliSense for .vvm controls, so you won't have to look in the documentation. Text box, text equals value, which means that I'm connecting this property of the control with the property in the view model. Number 1 plus, and the second text box is here. And now I want to print out the result, so I can use this syntax. If the binding is not inside HTML element, if it's just in plain text, I have to use double curly braces, because single curly braces have special meaning in scripts and style elements. Yeah, so if I need to use it in the text, I have to double the braces, and I'm printing out the result. And now I can add a button. So button, text, maybe calculate, and when I click the button, I can call a function in the view model. The function is called calculate. If I want to, I can pass some parameters to the function, but my function doesn't have any parameters, so I'm calling it just like this. And that's it. Basically, two text boxes, one button, and printing out the result. So when I run this application, crappy Chrome. Let's try it once again. Okay, now it works. The first loading takes some time because IIS Express is starting and the application is compiling. And now the image is a little bit shifted on the screen, so I will move this here. So we can see two text boxes. So I can enter some values, 15 plus 4, and when I hit calculate, I can see the result. So how this magic works, if you look in the page source, you can see that the text box was replaced by the DotVVM runtime with HTML elements. So I have input type text, and I'm using the Knockout.js data bind syntax, which says value column number 1. Yeah. I can use expressions in the data binding, and these would get translated to JavaScript. So you can use operators and things like that. And this command is a way how Knockout.js enters or writes text in the page. So this command will print out the result variable. So basically, .vvm allows you to generate a Knockout.js application, and it does practically the same thing, or the similar thing you would type manually if you were using Knockout.js, because you would use these expressions. How the button works: if I open the developer tools and open the network tab and click on the button, I can change some values, for example, and click calculate. We can see that we cannot see. Okay, one more. It depends from which tab you open the developer tools. I have opened it from the wrong tab. That's yeah. Now I can see the HTTP request here. So when you click the button, the view model will get serialized, sent to the server. Server will execute the function and send the results back to the client. So let's look what's inside the communication. As you can see, this is what was transferred from the client to the server. So there is some metadata about what function was called and things like that. There is a cross-site request forgery prevention, so nobody could trick this application, for example, from the iframe and things like that. And you can see that these 3 lines at the end, these are the properties of the view model, which is sent to the server. On the server, it's deserialized. The calculate function will be called, and the server will detect what has changed and send you the changes. So it's not sending the entire view model, it's just sending just a diff, the changes to the result property. So that's the basics of how DotVVM works. DotVVM has several nice features, and of course every line of business application contains some grids with data. So in DotVVM there is a control which is called grid view, and it supports the basic features you would expect, for example sorting, paging, templating of the individual cells and things like that. So let's look how grid view works. I have a sample application. It's a trivial sample of CRUD, so basic select, insert, update, delete functionality. So I have to zoom it out. So I'm rendering a simple grid with some data, and I can sort it by any column I want. You can customize the individual cells, so I can add some button inside the cell, and I can highlight some rows because they are based on some condition. So let's look at the syntax. This application uses entity framework. So here in the database folder, I have the entity framework model for my database. It's very simple. We have just order table. Every order can have several items, and item is bound to some product. So very simple database. And I also have services. So I have a service class which gets DB context in the constructor, and it can give me a list of orders, and it can give me details of an individual order, and it can save the changes made to the order. So that's basically this very simple business layer for my application. And in the page, which is default.html, we have a grid view control, which is bound to a collection of orders. It's a collection, I will talk about it later. And there is some columns defined, so I have a text column for ID, text column for the created date. I have a template column for email address because I don't want to just type out the text, I want to create a link. So I have a template column for the address, and as you can see, you can use expressions in the bindings. These would be translated to JavaScript, which in this case is very easy because it works the same way in C# and JavaScript. Number of items and total price. And this is the edit button. And as you can see, it's a control called route link, and it's used to generate links between DotVVM pages. I can open the route table. So when I open the .vvm startup file, you will see that there are 2 routes. Yeah, the first route is called default, and it's the list of the orders. And the second one is called order detail, and it has an ID parameter, which is not mandatory, it's optional. So that's the question mark. And in the page, the route link specifies name of the route, and then you can use the param-id, which says the ID parameter in the route will be bound to this value. So I'm substituting the ID to the route, and even if you change how the routes are constructed, this will work. So that's the link between pages. I also have a data pager control here, which is responsible for paging of the data. And to make the paging and sorting work, I am not using a regular collection. I could use a list of some objects or array or anything like that. But in .vvm, if you want to use the server-side paging, you can use this object. This collection is defined in .vvm, and it's a list, but it also carries some metadata about the sorting and paging. So this list knows what's the size of the page, what column I'm sorting by, and if I'm sorting descending or ascending. So that's basically the list plus some metadata. And this collection has a very useful method called load from variable. And if you pass iQueryable from Entity Framework into this method, it will get the paging and sorting parameters, apply it to the iQueryable, and evaluate the result. So if you look inside this getOrders query, I'm not doing any paging, any sorting, anything like that. I'm just returning iQueryable of all the orders, and the load from variable method will apply these paging and sorting commands on the iQueryable and fill the dataset. If you don't use Entity Framework, you can fill the dataset manually because there is items collection and you can assign any data inside this items collection, and you can also specify orders, paging options, total items count, so the pager control would know how many pages it should render for you. Yeah, so you need to get the data and total number of records, and the pager would still work. So if you don't use Entity Framework, you can you can fill the dataset manually. Basically, the load from variable does the same thing. It just sets the items and total items count, and that's it. Okay, so that's the grid view. One of the rows is highlighted because the price is greater than $500, and that's why row decorators is here. If you want to apply any parameter or property or any behavior to some row, you can use this decorator, and I'm setting class -VIP -order. If any attribute starts with class, it means that the rest of the name of the parameter will be the CSS class, which will be applied to the element, and this expression says whether the class is applied or not. So if the total price is greater than 500, the VIP order CSS class will be applied to the table row. If you look in the page inspector, you can see this row has the VIP order CSS class because the condition in the binding is true, and the other rows doesn't have this class. There is only the data bind syntax for Knockout.js, which is responsible for adding or removing the CSS class, but there is no class equals VIP order like here. So that's how row decorators work. You can use them for applying various CSS classes to any rows based on any condition. You can do, for example, clicking on the rows, and you can handle this also using decorators. So it's quite extensible to do anything you may need. Okay, so that's how grids work. Another very important feature of any line of business application is validation. And .vvm respects the validation attributes used in .NET. So if you are using the required email address max length attributes, you can use them because .vvm will use this validation mechanism. Some attributes can be translated to client side. So if you are using required attribute, it will be, of course, checked on the server side. Everything is always validated on the server side. But .vvm knows the required attribute, so it will be able to translate it and evaluate it on the client side. So the client validation happens automatically. There are, of course, some attributes which cannot be done on the client side. For example, if you want to check the uniqueness of email address in some database, it would be very difficult to do it on the client side. That is not done by DotVVM. It will be checked only on the server side where you have nice access to the database. And it's, of course, extensible, so if you want to implement the client-side behavior for your custom validation attribute, it's also possible. And so let's look how it works. I have a detail page here, so when I open some record, a detail page would will appear, and it is quite simple form. I have some read-only fields, I have the email address, which is just text box, and I can add and remove orders, items from the order. So that's basically the functionality, and every change which could affect the price will automatically recalculate the price of the order. So when I change the product, you can see the price is recalculated. Yeah, so that's the form. And if I, for example, do some mistake in the email address and forgot the @sign, you can see that this field is highlighted and the error message appears. So how does it work? The text box is bound to the contact email property, and as you can see, it has two validation attributes. The first one is required, the second one is email address. So it must be entered, it mustn't be empty, and it must be a valid email address. Of course, if you want to localize the error messages, you can reference the resource files here. You don't have to hard code the string in your code. That's not nice. Basically, these attributes are evaluated automatically. If you have some more complicated validation rules, the object can implement the iValidateTable object interface, and in the validate method you can do any validation you need. This will be, of course, evaluated only on the server. We are not translating this to client, but still you can use this. So, for example, if there is no or items in the order, I will refuse and I will return a validation error. Yeah? But you don't need to implement this, but if you have some sophisticated validation rules, you will need to do it. And in the markup, you can see that I have set validator.value to this div, which is around the text box, and I'm saying which property should be validated on this div element. And the last thing you need to do is to tell DotVVM how would you like the validation to look like or to work. So you have to mark some element. This element is based on this property. If it's not valid, we will apply some behavior on this element. And for example, I can say validator.invalid CSS class equals has error, which means that if this property is not valid, the div element will get this CSS class. When I fix the error, this CSS class will be removed. Yeah, so that's the rule. And because I would have to set this property on thousands fields in my application, I can set this on any parent element. So I have set it right here for the entire form, and if I want to, I can set it on one place for the entire application. Yeah. So and there is more options like this. There is, for example, set tooltip text, which will set the title element with the text of the error message. There is show error message, which will just print the error message out right next to the field, and things like that. There is also the validation summary control, which will display a list of all errors in the form. So that's how this list is made. Yeah, on the bottom of the page, there is the validation summary, and we are validating this will print out all the error messages from the entire form. So that's validation. Another nice feature is support of single-page applications. It can be useful when you are doing some rich interactive application, and you don't want to every transition between pages to reload the entire page because it contains some scripts and things that should be loaded and parsed again. So this could help the performance, and the single-page apps work very easily. This application, this demo, is not a single-page application right now, but I have a master page which defines the layout of all the pages in my application, and then somewhere in the master page there is the content placeholder, which says inside this element I will place the contents of the specific page the user is visiting. So the contents of this content control will be placed into the corresponding content placeholder. You can have more contents in the page and have them substituted into multiple places in the master page. And the nice thing is that if you change this content placeholder to SPA content placeholder, it will create single-page application. Yeah, so when I have to recompile the application, and I can just reload the home page of the application, and now it should become a single-page application. When I click on the edit button, you can see that I have this hash bank in the URL. So that's how you can recognize whether it's SPA or not. In the future versions of DotVVM, we will remove the hash bank because newer browsers have a feature called History API, which you can use to make single-page applications even without this syntax, because this was in history, this was the only way how to change a part of the URL without having the page completely reloaded. So that's why we are still using this. But even these old URLs will be compatible, so even existing applications will continue working. And as you can see, that it just works because I have used the route link control. It will detect that it's running inside single-page application, and it will just start generating another format of the URL addresses. So that's how single-page apps work, and you don't need to change anything than the content placeholder in your application. There can be only one SPA content placeholder in the application because the URL which is loaded inside is persisted behind the hash bank, and you cannot have two in the page. So that's the reason why you can have only one. And of course, the master pages could be nested inside. So if you have two parts of the application, for example, some public-facing part and some admin, they can have different master pages, or their master pages can share one big layout page. And it depends on how complex the hierarchy you actually need in your app. So that's single-page applications, and I will just remove it. So when I'm speaking about this next time, I would be able to show it. Another thing that DotVVM solves is the globalization and format strings. Because if you are using some client-side libraries, you might have noticed that they are typically using different format string syntax than in .NET, which is not a problem until you want to generate some PDF reports, which you typically will do on the server, and you will want to display some data formatted on the client side, and now you find out that the JavaScript implementation and .NET implementation produces slightly different formats in some situations. So DotVVM includes a library called globalize.js, which implements the same format strings as .NET Framework. So you can use the same formats and be sure that these will work both on the server and client and produce the equal results. And the format strings are supported in many controls. So for example, if I go back to the grid with for example, with the created date column, I have specified format string equals D. D is a shortcut, and it works also in .NET for a short date. So that's how it works. If I change it to large D, capital D, it would display the long date and so on. Or of course I can say D, M, Y, 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 Y and get the format I need. It works also in the text box control, so if you want the user to enter some numbers, you can specify the format string, and when the user leaves the field, the number will be formatted to the format you have specified. So that's formatting. If you want to localize your application, you can. We have a binding which is called resource, and you can use any resource file and reference any item from any resource file. So this will get translated and based on the culture of the current HTTP request, it will be sent to the user. So you can do localization using these kinds of bindings. It's also compatible with the new way of localization in ASP.NET Core. There is the localization service, so you can use it. You can use it either. So you can choose which variant is better for your use case. Yeah, so you can use the resource binding practically anywhere to replace any text value with string from resource files. Another feature is, for example, action filters and exception filters. I can do a global exception handling in my application. So I have created some intentional bug. If the email address, if the contact email contains the word error, I will throw an exception to simulate what happens when, for example, the data cannot be saved in the database or something like this. So when the email contains the word error, I will throw an exception, otherwise I will save the order and redirect the user to the list of the orders. So let's try it. There is no try catch or nothing like this. I'm just throwing out an exception. So I have so we can change this email address to error Cathy, and when I click the save, you can see that there is no exception. Some alert appeared because I have applied a global exception filter on the application. So if you look in the filters directory, there is a class called error handling filter, and it derives from exception filter attribute, which is part of .NET Framework. And there is a function called onCommandException, async, which is called whenever you hit an exception as a result of some command in the view model. So on every exception, this code is executed. And because all of my pages are placed inside the master page called site master, which has the site view model, and view models of the individual pages derived from the view model of the master page, you can, if the view model derives from site view model, I will just set the error message, which is defined in the site view model. Yeah? And I have two types of exceptions. There are some exceptions which you want to show to the user, so I'm calling them, for example, UI exception. So if it's UI exception, I will display the error message. If it's any other exception, for example, like not implemented exception or something you don't want to show to the user, I'm using just a generic error message, unaccepted exception occurred, please contact the support, or things like that. Yeah, because it's not a good idea to show user that this functionality is not implemented when you, while you have already sent invoice for this functionality. Yeah, so that's a better approach. So I'm just setting the error message property on the view model, and all view models derive from this one. So in the master page, I have this alert bar. It has alert danger, which will use the bootstrap styles to make the alert look like an alert. And if the error message is not null, I will show this element to the user, and inside of this element I will just print out the error message. So this is the way how you can, for example, display the alert, and it will appear whenever any exception appears during execution of the command. In the .vvm startup, I have registered the error handling filter in the global filters collection. That's why this filter will be used on every page, on every command in the view model. If you want to use it just somewhere, for example, just in the order detail view model, you can apply it as an attribute. So I can say error handling filter, and if I add the correct namespace, it will compile. And in this case, if I wouldn't register it globally, this would apply only to all commands in this view model. Or of course, I can apply it only to the individual method. So when I put this in the save changes, it will be applied only on this method. So you can choose on which level you want to apply this filter. It's very similar to MVC actually, because why create something else when the functionality in MVC just works and everybody is used to it. So that's the filters. .vvm supports dependency injection. So if you configure your services correctly, I'm registering order service, product service, and DB context, so I can then use these services in dependency injection. So when you open a view model, you can see there is a constructor, and it requests the order service and the product service, and they will be injected by the dependency injection, which is built in ASP.NET Core. Yeah, so that's you can use this mechanism too, and of course it's extensible. So if you are using any dependency injection container like Castle Windsor or simple injector, AutoFuck, Unity, anything, this will be integrated with the container too, so you can use it anywhere. Also, another feature of .vvm is server-side rendering. By default, everything renders on the client side. So the .vvm will just render the HTML, but if you use a grid view or any other control, it will render only a template how one row in the table looks like, and then this template will be instantiated on the client side by Knockout.js libraries, which is okay if you are building a line of business application where everything is behind the login screen, so you don't have to take care about search engines or anything like that. But if you are writing a public-facing application in .vvm, which is possible, but it depends if it has some advantages. I think that .vvm is best in the line of business scenarios, not in the public-facing parts of the website, which is why you can combine it with MVC, for example. But if you want to, you can. And the server-side rendering, if you turn it on, which I can do like this, I can say render settings mode equals server, and in this case the table will be rendered completely, so you will have all the rows and everything will be discoverable for the search engine, which is the thing you might need. So that's server rendering. You can apply it on any element and it propagates down to the children. And for example, if you have a very large line of business application and there are a lot of forms and most of them are the same, they're using the same controls, the same logic, the same consistent approach, you can use a library we have published. It's called .vvm Dynamic Data, and it allows you to generate grids and forms automatically by discovering the structure of the objects you want to show or edit. So, for example, here is a description. of the package, I have a class called employee, DTO, stands for data transfer object, and you can see that using .NET data annotation attributes, I can say this field will not be displayed. I will hide it. This is required, it's an email address, so these are validation attributes, and the display is also part of .NET Framework. And it says this field is named username. It's the first field in the form, and it belongs to the group called basic info. So you can mark every field in this object as you wish. Of course, even here you can reference the resource files, so it doesn't have to be hard-coded in the C# code. And there is the second group of field which is called contact info. And then you can, for example, use grid view like normally, and wrap it inside the control called dynamic data grid view decorator, which will discover the grid view inside, and it will generate the columns in the grid for you based on these declarations. Or you can generate forms. I can say dynamic entity, and the object I will put in the data context property. This is the object which will be discovered, and every field for every property will be generated in the order you have specified. If you split the fields in some groups, for example, I have the basic info and contact info groups, you can render each group individually, so I can create a form split into two columns next to each other, because I'm rendering only the group basic info or the contact info. And of course, this will produce some HTML structure of the form. If by default it can render the table, or bootstrap div class, div inside the label and other div, and with this correct CSS classes. If you want to customize this, you can look how this form builder is implemented. Oh, wrong URL, sorry. There is an interface called iFormBuilder, and you can implement your own mechanism how the HTML structure will work. So it's extensible. You can implement any structure of HTML elements to build your form. The two most common are already implemented there, so you can use this. So this can help when you want to build some larger application. Also, the mechanism of generating the field editors is extensible, so you can say if the property is datetime, I will use this control to represent my field. If it's, I don't know, anything which ends with currency ID, I will use combo box, which will be bound to this data, and etc., etc. So it's extensible and customizable. You can integrate .VVM into existing ASP.NET applications. Typically, you want to use it in two scenarios. One scenario is, for example, you have an application with two parts. One is public-facing. You can use, for example, Razor pages or something very simple to render the front-end part of the site. And there is some administration, some back-office part, which contains the difficult forms and grids and things like that, so you might use .VVM there. Or the other scenario is to modernize old web forms applications. Because web forms, there are still tons of web forms applications today, and they cannot be just rewritten, because if you write some project for 15 years, there's no chance that you will be able to rewrite it completely in less than half of that time, maybe. So, if the company relies on these applications, you can install .VVM inside and build new parts of the application in .VVM. You just need to create a master page which looks very similar or the same, uses the same CSS, the same structure, so it will look the same. And you can slowly start writing new parts of this application, or slowly rewrite the old parts. Maybe some of the parts will die because they won't be needed anymore, and after a few years, maybe the rest of the application will be able to migrate to .NET Core, or at least it may extend the lifetime of this application. So that's an interesting scenario, and the .VVM is not only the open source framework. because my company stands behind this project, and for free you can get the framework, which is open source, it's on GitHub. We will be very happy if anybody wants to join our team. And there is a Visual Studio extension, which is free for everyone, and it will always be free. And because we need to get something for living, we also have commercial products on top of .VVM. So if you want better IntelliSense and more features in the extensions, you can pay us a little bit of money, and you will get a full-featured IntelliSense with much more features. There is also controls for Bootstrap. There are a business pack, which is a set of controls which is meant for big enterprise applications. There's powerful grid, datetime pickers, modal dialogues, all of the controls you will need. And of course, if you need any help, we can help you with integrating .VVM into your projects, or with designing the architecture of the application and things like that. So we also offer support. Here are the links. So there's a documentation which is quite huge and still current, because we haven't had my major release. Second one, we are waiting for it. There is a Gitter chat, so you can communicate with the development team on Gitter, and of course link to our GitHub repository and to the homepage. .VVM is in stable version for more than 1 year. Current version is 1.1. It supports full .NET and .NET Core, so feel free to try it. And by the end of this year, we will be releasing .VVM 2.0, which will have a lot of new features which weren't possible until now. So for example, you will be able to call REST APIs directly from the views. So if you want to load the data in the data grid from a REST API, you will be able to do it without any communication between the .VVM runtime. You can connect this application, for example, to an external REST API and things like that. So if you're interested, if you want to try it, feel free to do it. Contact me if you have any other questions, any concerns, thoughts, everything. So that's all from me, and here is the contact. So thanks for your attention. If you have any questions, I will be happy to help you.